It's the stuff of Hollywood movies, but in war-torn trouble spots, you'll find a small group of men that risk their lives to bring in much-needed supplies.
But the payloads aren't legal. They're filled with drugs, guns and money, and those involved risk their lives for the sheer thrill. Matt Potter is a journalist who got inside this mysterious world and wrote about it in his forthcoming book, Outlaws Inc. I spoke to him from London. Well, firstly, Matt Potter, what possessed you, other than having some perverse death wish, to hop on these rickety planes and fly into all of these danger zones?
Yeah, well, I'd been over in the Soviet Union when it collapsed, and I'd seen all sorts of strange scenes going on. I mean, this was a period when the nuclear arsenals were being dismantled and were being guarded in sheds by one bloke and a padlock. And you'd see sort of soldiers running off down the street, sort of throwing their guns into the backs of lorries. And I was thinking, what's going to happen in a place this unstable and this full of weapons and this poor? And so I kind of monitored the situation over there. And after a while, I found myself as a journalist going to places like Serbia under Milosevic and seeing all these things coming and going. You know, these were all countries under lockdown. You know, there were sanctions right up to their ears, and they weren't supposed to be able to get anything. But there was furs, there was champagne, there were narcotics, there were guns coming and going. And I made a few inquiries, and then found out that there were phantom flights coming and going from some of these airports. And at one point, you know, after we invaded Afghanistan, I got the chance to sort of buy myself on to one of the flights as a bag of rice, actually.
Tell us about some of these smugglers. There really is no place they won't go, or no plane they won't fly if the price is right.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, so really they're kind of regular Joes. I mean, when it all started out, they were members of the Red Army. They were members of the Air Force, and they came back from, there was a disastrous war. I don't know if you remember, in Afghanistan. It was the sort of Soviet Vietnam, and they all came home. It was a terrible, terrible, costly conflict. They all came home just as their country was going bust, and they were all told, right, you know, thanks for all the fighting and everything. By the way, we can't pay you for the past 6 years. You've got no job. We'll have your uniform back, and you're homeless. And there were hundreds of thousands of them. This was the biggest standing army and air force the world had ever seen. And just a few of them, some of the guys with the super bombers and the cargo planes, decided they weren't going to take it, and pretty much sort of looked at the general, looked at the plane, looked at the general, looked at the plane, and said, right, I'm having that. They got back in their planes, flew them down to some, you know, an airfield in Kazakhstan, wherever, repainted them, and literally repainted them, and started out as sort of man with van, anything considered. We'll do any job, no matter how dirty. And that was the big bang that sort of spawned these guys all over the world. And now, fair enough, you know, some of them a lot of them run guns, a lot of them run drugs, but they're the guys who deliver the aid to places that nobody else wants to fly. I mean, you try getting a Western air crew to take a lot of the things to Somalia, or a lot of the ransoms that need dropping to pirates whenever a ship's been kidnapped. They're not going to do it for you. They'll start talking to you about health and safety, but health and safety is not a big consideration for these guys.
One of the inconvenient truths you uncover in this book is that as well as running humanitarian supplies such as food and aid to countries, often on these very same flights you'll find the Kalashnikovs and landmines being used to terrorise the subjects of said nation.
Yeah, and I mean, this is one of the things one of the unintended consequences, I guess, of these guys spilling out across the world with their old Soviet super bombers and cargo planes and troop transports, is the fact that these planes were built with a lot of secret compartments in. I mean, these compartments they're sort of literally under the floorboards, I guess, and these are compartments so secret and so full of sort of weapons and various other things that they don't appear on the blueprints, and even the customs guys and nobody else knows they're there. The pilots and the loadmasters, they know they're there, and they can be filled with, I guess, cash jobs, if you like. So you can be doing a paid job for the UN or a paid job for some very, very reputable charity organisation who will not know that the reason you're so incredibly cheap for them, and they've got to have value for their stakeholders, is that you're actually making your real money in tax-free dollars, taking Kalashnikovs to the Mujahideen or whatever else you're going to take, you know, guns to Somali pirates and Al-Shabaab. And that's actually, unfortunately, if you stop that, you also stop if you stop the sinner, you stop the saint. So you're actually, at the moment you stamp out these flights and you tell them they can't do that, you make it economically, it's not viable for them to be carrying aid at the very, very cheap prices they do. There's one pilot I know who'll take aid for free, and they just think he's very public-spirited. And
that's exactly it. It is hard to police. In fact, authorities, agencies around the world perhaps don't want to police this thriving international smuggling racket.
Oh, absolutely. There's no question that there are states and there are regimes where things are left deliberately fuzzy. Most of Africa, they don't actually have any radar that works across a lot of Africa, which means that as soon as you take off and lose visual contact from the airport, you can pretty much land in a field and swap whatever you want to swap around and take on some guns, and miraculously those apples that you took off with have changed into weapons and landmines or blood diamonds. I mean, there are a lot of places where this is left deliberately fuzzy, but we shouldn't underestimate the fact that this is left deliberately fuzzy by our governments as well, because these guys are the guys who do the dirty work for everybody. I mean, when you hear about an extraordinary rendition being made, you can bet that they don't go via commercial scheduled airline.
That's Matt Potter, journalist and, how shall we say, risk-taker extraordinaire.
Fascinating.
No, he willingly put himself into the teeth of danger flying in these planes that, if you read the book, a lot of these ex-Soviet planes are literally held together with gaffer tape, flying into these war zones, being shot at from the ground. So
as if it wasn't dangerous enough already.
Exactly. No, we simply wait for the inevitable movie from his book.